This is really interesting as well. Now, this goes to my alpha males in the room. We think we know everything. We have it all figured out. There's no reason to get feedback from anybody. According to research done in 2022, people often struggle asking for help due to several common reasons. Number one, fear of appearing incompetent, weak, or inferior. You start a job, right? Whether it's roofing, whether you're in the admin world, whatever it may be, and you don't know what you're talking about. And instead of calling someone to pick up the phone and saying, hey, listen, Mr. Customer, client, subordinate, supervisor, I know the answer to that question. Let me call someone real quick. I'd just rather act like I haven't figured out. You are inhibiting your opportunity to grow. We look at that in our minds as a way to present strength. It's not. All you're doing is spiraling into incompetence. Now, there is a certain side of sales, which everybody in this room is in sales, to where sometimes you have to use something called discretion to know when to put your foot in your mouth or not, right? Because you're going to get yourself in situations that you don't understand. But you should always be open to receiving feedback and receiving help. The number two reason is concern about being rejected, which can be embarrassing and painful. Maybe you grew up and maybe your dad was always like, you just got to figure it out. It's up to you. Go. What's wrong with you, boy? So every single time you went to him, he made you feel stupid. Or maybe you had that teacher and you were the kid that was sitting in class and you were like, please do not call on me because I will not. I was that kid. I was never prepared, bad ADHD, didn't have the support, wasn't really good whenever it came to reading. I was like, please, God, don't call on me. And then he always ended up calling on me because I manifested it. And then the next thing you know, I didn't know the answer. And then I get embarrassed, which pushed me more back to shame, which my 5-year-old self basically manifested in my life all the way up until my early 30s, to where I lived in shame constantly. So I never wanted to ask for help because I was the one to present the idea that I had it all together, which didn't allow me to grow. I got by for a really long time doing that. But I tell you what, I wasn't me. You can't be as scared to ask for help. It's something that cannot exist in your world. Number three, worrying about burning and inconveniencing others. This is a big one. How many people in this room have sat there and been like, well, if I share that with my girlfriend, she's not going to know how to handle it. If I tell my boss that I just signed a deal and it was a bad deal because I'm looking back 20 minutes ago and I realized the fact that I didn't look at all the details, but I'm just not going to say anything because it's going to burden them. How many people have done that? I'm just not going to call them. It will fix itself later. I don't need help. I'll just figure it out on the flip side, right? Yeah, there's a certain amount of, if you make a mistake, you can figure it out yourself. But calling someone and asking help in those situations is a true illustration of strength. That's how you build trust with your teammates. That's how you connect with your teammates. That's how they know that you're looking to them for their advice. But often we think that, well, by sharing that, we're just going to burden them, right? On the next page, I'm going to talk a little bit about the science for why that is actually not true. It's actually quite the opposite. What we do not realize is that most people want to help, but we allow our ego to tell ourselves nobody wants to help. I got to figure it out myself. Now, a lot of that is based off of whatever your preconceived notions are, based off of whatever your synaptic pruning is, based off of whatever experiences you had growing up. Maybe you didn't have the right teachers that facilitated a growth mindset. Maybe you had parents that always rejected you. Maybe you never felt good enough and you felt like you had to go figure it out yourself. So this is not necessarily your fault. This is a result of conditioning, okay? But by not asking for help or being transparent about how we feel, we put ourselves into a high cortisol hormonal state. How many times have you walked into an office, an area, a business, and you walk up and you talk to the person at the front desk or whatever, and you're just like, wow, that person's having a bad day, before they say a word? Or maybe you're at a homeowner's house and you're like, man, that person's just having every day. The moment they open the door, right? It's cortisol. You can sense it. 10-foot area. We've talked about this before in other classes, but whenever it comes to this area of transparency and being vulnerable, it's a big deal. Does anybody have an example or a story that is related to asking for help, to where maybe you were like, I don't want to ask for help, but you ended up doing it and it ended up producing a positive result when you thought that it would not? I'm going to sit in silence until someone raises their hand and has a story. Okay. Do you have a story? I want a story about someone that was in a situation to where they didn't want to ask for help, but then they ended up asking for help and it ended up turning out better than what they expected. But this is something we can all fall into. Okay, if you relate with number one, so we're going to take a poll real quick. There's 1, 2, 3, right? Fear of appearing incompetent, weak, or inferior, concern about being rejected, which can be embarrassing and painful, or worry about burdening and inconveniencing others. If you relate to number one the most, raise your hand. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you relate to number two the most, raise your hand. If you relate to number three the most, raise your hand. Yeah. So it's interesting because number two is more of a female trait than a male. Nobody. But this is typically, those two are typically where is the man? Yeah, right? You wear emotions on your sleeve. But like typically, like that's what we think about as men, right? Because we have like this thought process of like, I'm this man and I have to have it all figured out. And like I have to be the alpha male. That doesn't build a team mentality, right? You got to be able to admit whenever you don't have it all figured out. I was listening to a podcast this morning, Craig Rochelle and Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek, Start With Why, was why I started Solving Why. And in that, he was talking about whenever it comes to leadership and whenever it comes to being vulnerable and whenever it comes to asking questions. And he said something that just hit me hard. He said, what I've learned is that he's like, whenever I stand on stage, I have this strong confidence to where everybody looks at me and they're like, oh, they think I know what I'm doing. He's like, but whenever it comes to leadership more than my people, the mindset that I try to have is I have strong opinions that are held loosely. Strong opinions that are held loosely. Like, I know what I'm doing. I'm aware of my surroundings. I know where I'm going, but I'm always going to be open to someone else's opinion. But that takes vulnerability, and it takes, in my opinion, true strength.